Hello, everyone, and welcome to the homeowner webinar for Florida-friendly landscaping. We're going to let people get into the room here. And while we're waiting, why don't you put the insect that you see most in your garden into the chat box, and we'll see what we come up with. Lubbers, we got lubbers. That's not a scale and aphids late. Wow, we're going pretty fast here. Zebra swallowtails, mosquitoes. Let's see, assassin bugs. There are a lot of different, you guys are coming up with a lot of different ones today. Bees and thrips and dragonflies, carpenter bees. I know it's 11:01. We're just going to give it like maybe one more minute until I see the people in the room are starting to slow down here. I think actually we might be good. Okay, well, let's just start. Out of respect for your time and for Dr. Kalaman's time, let's go ahead and start this webinar. Hello and welcome to the Florida Friendly Landscaping Homeowner Webinar given every third Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. My name is Jen Marvin. I am the Florida Friendly Landscaping Education Coordinator here at the Florida Friendly Landscaping Program. The first thing, some housekeeping, the chat will be closed before the presentation starts. So in just a few minutes, we'll close the chat, but we'll open up the question and answer box and we will answer those questions at the end of the session. So go ahead and enter them whenever you'd like during the session. We'll monitor them and we'll have a question and answer session with Dr. Kalaman at the end. The next webinar is April 21st, and it will be on using your automatic irrigation system with Laura Vasquez. I'm trying to think if there's any more housekeeping. Let's see. Again, it's for us, it's every Tuesday, every third Tuesday of the month at 11 a.m. Also, stick around after to take your survey, our survey, to let us know how we're doing and what you would like to see next year as I plan the webinars for next year. So today we have Dr. Heather Kalaman giving us a presentation on Garden Guardians, Exploring Florida's Beneficial Insects. A little bit about Dr. Kalaman. Dr. Heather Kalaman is Extension faculty with IFAS, specializing in sustainable landscaping and urban biodiversity. She's a graduate of the University of Florida's Doctor of Plant Medicine program, which emphasizes plant diagnostics and integrated pest management strategies to promote effective, environmentally responsible plant care. Heather also holds a master's degree in environmental horticulture, where her thesis research explored pollinator-plant interactions. With experience in research, diagnostics, teaching, and managing over 4 acres of demonstration gardens throughout Orange County, she works closely with residents, green industry professionals, policymakers, and researchers to promote landscapes that are practical, resource efficient, and wildlife friendly. So, Dr. Kalaman, if you would like to take it away, I can't wait to hear about your beneficial insects of Florida.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you for that incredible introduction. Thank you everyone for coming. As Jen mentioned, my name is Heather Kalaman. I am a county extension agent in Orange County, Florida. So our offices are located in Orlando. And I'm very excited about this topic today. This is one I feel very passionately about and one that I am still continuously learning more about as the days, weeks, months, and years unfold. I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off so we can focus on the slides today. So we have a lot to cover. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be covering different sections. I first like to start off with the situation. So what's going on here in the state of Florida and why should we care about this topic today? We're going to go through some different definitions, some commonly used words that you guys might hear frequently used, and just better explain what those words mean. We're going to meet the team. So we're going to talk more about some of our more common beneficial insects. We're going to go through a plant palette and talk more in depth about how we can better support these beneficial insects in our urban residential landscapes, some different considerations for how we manage our landscapes and how that contributes to the overall health and well-being of beneficial insects. And then I'm going to leave you guys with a few resources. Obviously, we can't cover everything in an hour, so just some additional resources for you guys to kind of read through on your own moving forward. Okay, so what is the situation here in Florida? Our population has grown substantially over the past few years, over the past few decades, certainly, over 14% in the last decade. We have a little over 22 million folks currently living, residing in the state of Florida. And oftentimes we hear this number that, 1,000 people are moving to Florida every day. And while that might seem crazy, we might kind of brush that off. The average is actually closer to around 1,200. So it is true. We know that most folks in the state of Florida are residing in urban or residential landscapes. So over 90% of our population are occupying these spaces. And with this comes, of course, an increased demand for these intensively managed urban landscapes. Some of you might have seen this map before from the Thousand Friends of Florida. And essentially, what they tried to do was envision what our state will look like in terms of development if we continue to modify, develop our state at the same rate that we currently have been. So, their predictions indicate that by the year 2070, we are expected to have around 33.7 million residents. So, with these modified landscapes and these urban and residential landscapes, data has shown that a little over 50%, sometimes more in certain areas, of our total household water usage is going towards irrigating our landscapes. We also know that these fertilized landscapes may contribute anywhere from 1 to 40% of the nitrate content in our urban residential stormwater runoff. And there are, of course, other contributing factors to this as well, but certainly something to be mindful of. In addition to that, here in the US, our urban landscapes use on average around 80 million pounds of pesticide active ingredients annually. Okay, so we are constantly modifying our landscapes, and with that comes pretty intensive management strategies. And as you all know, and hopefully are learning more about, through focusing on more sustainable practices, we can try to make better choices in the end. So, with this urbanization and how this really relates more to beneficial insects in our landscapes, we had a pretty cool global meta-analysis which looked at over 500 studies and found that this urbanization is also reducing insect abundance and richness globally. So, when we talk about insect abundance, what we're referring to are the total number of individual insects. So this was decreased by around 42%. And our species richness is going to be describing the various different kinds of insects, which these studies have shown to be reduced by around 40%. And that is as compared to natural areas. Okay, so this is relatively substantial. And when we talk about these urban stressors that are impacting our beneficial insects, the first thing we can really think about are the, of course, fragmented green spaces, the way that we are building and developing our residential and urban areas. So these are often isolated patches of green, hopefully some green, right? Surrounded by pavement, buildings, and roads. What this does over time is create what's known as the urban heat island effect. Some of you may be familiar with this concept, but essentially, if it feels like it's substantially hotter in areas that are predominantly, you know, maintained or developed with non-pervious materials like asphalt, non-porous concrete, things like that, they are much hotter, right? And these higher temperatures really do accelerate pest development in many cases. This can lead to mismatched life cycles with pest insects versus beneficial insects, because a lot of our beneficial insects may, in some cases, have lower thermal tolerance, okay, to this extreme heat. So again, over time, this is going to increase pest abundance and cause greater stressors to our landscaping plants. Not only that, but it is additionally limiting the movement and also the recolonization of our beneficial insects, which we'll talk more about why that's so important in just a moment. Other urban stressors that impact our beneficial insects are lower plant diversity. So, oftentimes, as many of you know, when we're developing new homes, new neighborhoods, we have a lot of fill and gravel brought in, severely compacted soils, and we kind of roll out some turf, maybe a few crotons, and kind of tell folks, good luck. Best of luck to you. And these aren't always the most conducive environments, obviously, to have healthy, thriving landscapes. So these traditional landscapes tend to favor more turf grass forward, fewer ornamental species. And oftentimes, these ornamental species may lack continuous blooms or any type of really structural diversity to help support these insects. Sometimes these ornamental plants may not be resource rich, so they may not have been bred to produce things like pollen, so they might be sterile plants. If they do produce pollen, there may not be very much protein content to that pollen. So, again, those are very important things, of course, for things like pollinators and other beneficial insects. And the way that we're managing our landscapes through pesticide use and pruning is also incredibly important as well. So let's talk more about bugs, insects in general, but I'll use the term bugs loosely here. We have identified, categorized about 1 million species of insects worldwide. So that's kind of, what we've been able to do as human scientists, which is pretty good. But there are an estimated 10 million species of insects worldwide. Okay, so we're just really starting to learn what's going on out there. Here in the US, we have around 91,000 insect species and a little over 12,000 species here in the state of Florida. So, pretty speciose, very cool. It is important to note that of these insect species, only 1 to 2% are actually considered pests, and that is pests of plants, humans, and other wildlife. Okay, so I think that that's a huge take-home point. I know that a lot of folks, maybe when you're talking to your friends, family, neighbors, may not be super enthusiastic about insects, but I always find that this fact in particular tends to really send that message home. So, what about the rest? What about the other 98 to 99% of insects? Well, they are either neutral, they're just kind of out there doing their thing, not bothering anyone, or they are beneficial. What do we mean by beneficial? What we mean by that is that they are providing some type of ecosystem service. Okay, so probably the most common or popular one are our pollinators, right? So they are feeding on pollen and nectar and subsequently moving pollen from one plant to another. So that is an incredibly important ecosystem service. Natural pest control, which is what we'll be focusing on today, in many ways, equally as important. Nutrient recycling. So these are our various insects that are accelerating decomposition. They are returning nutrients to our soil. Okay, so these are going to be our insects that are breaking down organic material. They may include things like dung beetles, ants, various fly larvae, and many different types of beetles in general. And then food for wildlife. Okay, so incredibly important well for birds and other mammals that do consume insects. So each of these functions essentially support the overall productivity and the stability of both our natural and our managed ecosystems. And it's really important that we are thinking about our front yard, our backyard, our side yards as ecosystems. So let's get into some definitions. The first one I want to talk about is biological control. Okay, sometimes this can seem like a hefty word that's thrown around by very serious scientists, but you guys are all very serious scientists, especially after today. So let's get more comfortable using this and focus on the different types. So, biological control is essentially the use of living natural enemies to control various pests. We have three primary types. The first is classical. Okay, so this is when we import natural enemies of exotic invasives. We do a ton of extensive research on these organisms. It's very highly regulated and it takes many, many years to receive approval for release. So essentially, we have an invasive species established and we have to figure out a way to control it because they are relatively without enemies. They are enemy free. So we don't have things that have co-evolved with these organisms. They don't know how to eat them. Maybe they don't want to eat them. So we go to where this invasive pest is from. We figure out what's eating it there, bring it back, and again, go through those extensive research experiments to ensure that once we do release them, they will behave accordingly. We also have what's called augmentative biological control. So this is the supplemental release of a biocontrol agent to increase numbers that are already present. So a good example of this would be buying a container of ladybugs or predatory mites and then releasing them into your garden. These are particularly effective in controlled settings like greenhouses. Conservation biocontrol is what we're going to be focusing on today. So this is essentially modifying our environment, our landscapes, to increase natural enemies already present or in the adjacent areas. Natural enemy is any organism that kills or reduces the numbers of another organism. And beneficials include our pollinators and our natural enemies of pests. Okay, so the two types of natural enemies that we'll be focusing on today are predators and parasitoids. Predators essentially capture and eat prey throughout their lives. They are usually larger than their prey, and they tend to be more generalist in what they're eating. So their prey isn't super specific all the time. They can be adults or they can be immatures. They can both serve as predatory insects, and the host will die, obviously, as they are eating it. This differs from a parasitoid, which is any organism who is laying their eggs on or inside of a host. So these are essentially usually smaller than their host, and they can be quite selective. So a lot of our parasitoid organisms are only going to be maybe attacking a particular life stage or a few different species or families. And it's not going to kill its host right away. Obviously, its eggs will be developing inside of it. So the host usually won't die until the young or adult emerge from it. Insectary plants are essentially things that we're adding to our garden to attract, feed, and shelter natural enemies to enhance biological pest control. So again, these are plants that are providing food in the form of nectar, pollen, and oftentimes even prey for natural enemies to feed on. So let's meet the team. Before we get into our favorite beneficial insects, I wanted to briefly kind of go over the two types of metamorphosis or insect life cycles. So the first on the left here is incomplete metamorphosis. So many of our more basal or rudimentary insects still go through this metamorphosis process. So essentially, adult will lay eggs. And when those eggs hatch, smaller immatures will emerge, which are also referred to as nymphs. Those nymphs will go through several series of molting until they eventually reach their adult form. This differs from complete metamorphosis, which is when an adult will lay eggs. From those eggs, larvae will hatch. Those larvae will eventually pupate before we have our eventual adults emerge. Okay, so I just wanted to introduce some of these terms to you, especially when we talk about which life stages of some of these insects are predatory or parasitic. So first up, probably our most common are lady beetles. These are commonly referred to as ladybugs, but they are not true bugs, they are beetles. So that's just wanted to include that important distinction. Most recognizable, red with black spots. We can see the adult on the right there. The predatory stage are both the larvae and the adults. So the larvae are seen on the left here. Very common in the garden. You've probably seen these a lot. Maybe you didn't know what they were prior, but you do now. The larvae are long and relatively flat. They can be black or blue with orange spots. And they are generalists, so they will feed on numerous different insects. They will attack any stage of prey. Most often, we see them feeding on aphids, but they will also consume other soft-bodied insects, mites, scale insects, mealybugs, our whiteflies, smaller caterpillars, beetle grubs, and even other insect eggs. It's also important to think again about all the different life stages in our gardens as we're cultivating a habitat. So, being mindful of when these insects are laying eggs, so we're not doing anything to disrupt those eggs from hatching and continuing the cycle. So, lady beetle eggs are yellow or orange in coloration. They typically are laid in clusters of anywhere from 10 to 50 eggs, and they are found on the underside of leaves to help protect them from predators and extreme weather patterns. Oftentimes, our lady beetles will lay their eggs near aphid colonies, so increasing their larval survival. And these eggs will hatch in anywhere from 3 to 5 days. I wanted to include this. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. I get a lot of phone calls and emails about this organism. So feel free to sound off in the chat if you feel so inclined, in what you think this organism might be. Um, and I will kind of just carry on. But white larvae, right? When we see this, we might think, oh God, mealybugs. Oh no, mealybug infestation. This is actually a beneficial insect. This is called the mealybug destroyer, which is a super cool name, probably a very cool band name. And this is the adult. So the adults are black and red. And essentially, as we can see here, they look very similar to mealybugs. Okay, so we have a mealybug on the left. And mealybugs tend to be quite stationary or very slow. And those of you who've had a mealybug infestation know this quite well. They are smaller than our mealybug destroyers, a little bit more oval or compact, and they tend to hide out in leaf joints or stems. So this is commonly where we see our mealybugs hanging out. Mealybug destroyers differ in the sense that they are pretty active. So they will be actively crawling around a plant. They are slightly larger than most mealybugs, and they're quite elongated, almost scaly looking, alligator-like. They will be found near mealybugs, consuming them. So if you see the two side by side, it can be a little bit more clear when you're trying to identify them. Up next, we have lacewings. We have green and brown lacewings here in Florida. The adults have two lacy wings, and they are often poor flyers, so just something to be mindful of. The adults will feed on nectar, pollen, and honeydew from plants or secreted from other insects. The predatory stage of our lacewings are primarily our larvae, which is photographed here. Pretty gnarly looking little creature. Sometimes the adults will also feed on insects as well, but primarily the larval stage. Similar to our lady beetles, they are often found near aphid colonies. They are voracious feeders on aphids, so this is where they get their common name aphid lions. And they are equipped with these large, kind of hooked mandibles that they will use to pierce and then suck out the fluids of their prey. So here we can see a pretty cool image of that. So we have the larvae of the lacewing there in the middle, kind of going to town on an aphid, and then subsequently probably the whole colony over time. We also want to keep an eye out for lacewing eggs. So many of you have probably seen these around your garden. Um, and the females will, of course, try to lay the eggs in places where their young have the best chance of survival. But sometimes you may have seen these like on your windshield, on your car, on the side of your house, on random objects. So that can happen too. But essentially, the females will lay their eggs on these kind of cute little stalks. This is to hopefully protect them from predators. But a single female can lay hundreds of eggs in her lifetime. Up next, we have our tachinid flies. Okay, so we have over 1,500 species of tachinid flies here in North America. These are pretty robust flies. They can occur in a wide range of colors, from kind of a more muted brown to yellow or even blue. The adults are incredibly important pollinators. So we see a photo here of a tachinid fly on a flower. The adults are commonly found feeding on nectar and even pollen of various flowers and spreading that pollen around, which is incredibly important. And the adult females are parasitoids. So they will be laying their eggs directly on or in a host. Some of them will even lay their eggs on a leaf, which is then often consumed by a caterpillar. Many of our tachinid fly species are specialists, so they will only parasitize a narrow range of different hosts within a family or particular certain types of species. So here we can see some of our adult tachinid flies feeding on nectar or pollen from some of our various wildflowers. And here we can see an adult female parasitizing an armyworm, which is a common caterpillar pest on various cultivated crops. So on the left-hand side there, you can see her laying her egg on or in the host. And then we have a close-up shot on the right-hand side of those eggs attached to the armyworm body. This poor soul got hit right in the face with the um, parasitoid tachinid fly. So this is a yellow-necked caterpillar. Not a super intense pest. Can be a little bit of a nuisance on various hardwood species. But yes, this one was parasitized in the face, so not a good fate here. Up next, we have our hoverflies. So these are very common. You may have heard them also referred to as flower flies or syrphid flies. They do resemble honeybees somewhat. If they're flying around and landing on flowers, you may mistake them for a honeybee. But they don't have a stinger, so they do not sting. Their colors and pattern is solely to deter predators. The predatory stage here is the larvae. So the adults are very important pollinators, and their larvae, photographed on the right, are voracious eaters. So they kind of have this maggot-like appearance. They can be yellow, reddish, or greenish. So there's a little bit of variety there. And they are voracious feeders, especially on our aphid pests. So here we can see some syrphid flies kind of go into town on some various aphid pests. And this is a really cool photograph I always like to include. On the left there, we have a larvae of our lady beetle, and then on the right, we have a syrphid fly larva. So this is what I would consider to be a very healthy ecosystem. Parasitoid wasps. So we have several kinds of parasitoid wasps. Most of them are very, very small. So this is probably one of the more understudied areas of entomology because some of our parasitoid wasps are so incredibly small. We just haven't had enough time to discover them all. But essentially, they are parasitizing eggs that can be even microscopic in size. The parasitoid stage here is the adult, and the females will essentially again lay their eggs on or in a host egg or larvae. Their young will then develop within or on the host insect. And these are incredibly important natural enemies of various caterpillars, grubs, whiteflies, and aphids. Some of our more common parasitoid wasps include braconid wasps. So these are usually small to medium-bodied parasitoids. They will attack a wide range of hosts, particularly caterpillars and aphids. Most of them, many of them, will develop inside the host, and they are very commonly used in biocontrol for various crop pests. We also have our ichneummonid wasps. So these are typically a little bit larger, maybe more slender than braconid wasps. They often have a very long ovipositor, as you can see in the photograph there. This is used to reach hidden hosts, even in wood material or soil. They mostly parasitize larvae or pupae of other insects. They're an extremely diverse group, and they will lay their eggs on or in a host. Last up, we have our trichogramma wasps. So these are extremely tiny. If they seem very tiny from the photograph, they definitely are. They are quite specialized. They are very commonly used in mass release biocontrol programs to target various crop pests as well as landscape pests as well. So here we have a photograph of a braconid wasp that has parasitoized a hornworm caterpillar. And then on the right-hand side there, you can see the braconid wasp has emerged. In addition to parasitoid wasps, we also have predatory wasps. So we have a variety of predatory wasps here in Florida. Thread-waisted wasps, mason, mud daubers, potter wasps, typhoid wasps, spider wasps, and even paper wasps. Most of our predatory wasps are solitary, meaning they are kind of out in the garden, out in the world on their own, doing their thing. Some of them are social, so they do form colonies. Of course, paper wasps would be a good example of that. So typically, when it comes to insects, when we think of social insects that form colonies, they can be a little bit more aggressive because they have something to defend. So they are defending their nests or colonies, whereas our solitary insects tend to be a little bit more docile. The predatory stage here is the adult, and they are quite voracious predators. So they will attack many different species of caterpillars, other hornets, even flies, adults and larvae, and other arthropods as well. So here we can see thread-waist wasps, or our sphesid wasps, consuming various prey. So on the left, it looks like we have some kind of looper caterpillar, and then on the right, we have a grasshopper of some sort. Up next are our minute pirate bugs. They get their common name, minute, from the fact that they are indeed very minute. They are small, often overlooked in the landscape, but they are very important natural enemies. The predatory stage are adults and nymphs. So these are a good example of an insect that does not go through complete metamorphosis. So the nymphs and the adults are voracious eaters. They feed on small pests in our garden like thrips, mites, aphids, whiteflies, scale, small caterpillars, and various eggs of other insect pests. So here is a good representation of just how small these little minute pirate bugs are. And I always like to show these two photos when I teach this workshop and ask the audience, which I guess I can't obviously do right now, but is this the same bug? Um, which it is not. Um, one of these is a chinch bug. And as you notice, they can look quite similar, right? Just upon first glance. Um, so what do we do in these situations when we have insects that look quite similar? One of them we're not welcoming into our landscape, and the other one is a beneficial. Well, we might look at the nymphs, right? So those look quite similar too. We have chinch bug nymphs on the top, and we have the nymph of a minute pirate bug on the bottom. So again, quite similar. Maybe we're looking for that band on the chinch bug, but again, that can be quite difficult to spot with the naked eye. Something we can do is we can think about the environment in which we're finding these insects. So if we see high populations of this insect in the top in our managed turf grass, it could very likely be a chinch bug. Whereas our minute pirate bugs, we tend to find feeding in flowers, ornamental plants, and even our edible crops. Another interesting bug is our big-eyed bugs. Okay, so these also look very similar to minute pirate bugs or chinch bugs to an untrained eye. Very common predator, as their name implies, they have big eyes. So often confused for chinch bugs, important to distinguish before treating. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But they have piercing, sucking mouth parts that they will use to feed on various moth eggs, caterpillars, thrips, and mites. So again, here we have a photograph of our chinch bug, our big-eyed bug, and our minute pirate bug. They are quite similar physically. And I like to show this photograph to really emphasize why proper identification before making landscape management decisions is really, really key here. Because one, we're treating as more of a pest, obviously, and the others are incredibly important beneficial insects in our landscapes. Next, I want to talk about predatory mites. So oftentimes when we think of mites, we think of our spider mites, our spider mite pests, but many mites are actually beneficial predators of our plant-feeding mites, such as spider mites. They tend to be pear-shaped rather than more oval or rounded, and they are quite long-legged. They're also moving actively in search of prey, whereas spider mites tend to be a little bit more stationary, a little bit slower. Our predatory mites are going to be quite active. Many predatory mites are primarily used commercially around the world to control important pests of crops. They're used in a lot of controlled environment settings like greenhouses as well. One of the primary distinguishing factors between a predatory mite and a spider mite is that predatory mites do not produce webbing. So if you do see mites on your plant and they're not producing this kind of key characteristic webbing, that can be a good distinguishing factor. There are a ton of super important beneficial insects and arthropods that we did not cover today, including all of our various ground beetles that help with decomposition. Spiders, incredibly important. Our earwigs, our assassin bugs, damselflies, and praying mantis. So I highly encourage all of you to continue learning and reading more about all of our incredible, important beneficials in the landscape. So now that we've met our team, how do we promote natural enemies in our modified landscapes? Well, the first thing that we want to focus on is providing resources, and equally as important, reducing disturbances. So when we talk about providing resources, we have many different ways that we can accomplish this. One of the more easy, straightforward ways is by growing herbs. So, growing various herbs in the carrot family, for example, things like coriander, fennel, cilantro, parsley, and dill. All of these plants have been shown to attract natural predators to the landscape. If you allow these herbs to go to flower, they can often bloom over extended periods. So they are supporting insects throughout a growing season. Their flowers are rich in nectar and pollen that are very high in sugars and protein. Okay, so this is going to be boosting predator longevity over time. This is also true for various plants in the mint family. So, growing things like lemon balm, spearmint, bee balm, which those of you who grow bee balm or monarda know how incredibly attractive this plant is in any landscape to pollinators and other beneficials. I don't think I've ever seen more insects on a plant in my entire life. And this is the flower here of bee balm, for those of you not familiar. Catnip, thyme, basil, all of these plants are incredibly attractive to predatory wasps, to our hoverflies, our lacewings, and even predatory beetles. Wildflowers, very easy to grow, very easy to provide a nectar and pollen resource to pollinators and other beneficial insects. Things like our native echinacea, dandelion, yarrow is one of my favorite alternative ground covers I've been working a lot with. Calendula, chamomile, and fleabane. Um, what we see is that often with these kind of open, more composite flowers, it's quite easy for insects to access the nectar and pollen of these flowers. It also provides kind of a flat landing pad for insects, which can be really important as many of our insects do not hover feed. So they need a little bit of a resting point to kind of sit and feed. More wildflowers. So I'm always promoting wildflowers. Of course, our state wildflower, Coreopsis, cosmos can also be very easy to grow. Our beloved gaillardia or blanket flower, zinnias, goldenrod is spectacular in any landscape. For those of you who have grown it, you know it can reach like 8 feet tall. Once the flowers die back, you can kind of just cut it directly back to the ground and it will flush back out. Of course, our Rudbeckia as well is incredibly attractive to different beneficial insects. Other ornamentals we can focus on include rouge plant, which is the plant with the red berries there. This is a really great native plant option for areas of your landscape that might be a little bit shadier, so full shade, partial shade, under a oak tree, understory, things like that. Porterweed, our native porterweed. So we want to make sure that we're not growing invasive porterweed, which will have more of an erect growth habit. Liatris, our sweet alyssum, rattlesnake master, which is the rayless kind of spiky flower in the bottom center there, one of my favorite wildflowers to grow, and our very popular native Stokes aster as well. Woody perennials are perhaps the most important plant types of plants when it comes to supporting beneficial insects. Trees are the most important plant in any landscape for so many reasons. We can't get into all of the reasons today, but shade, shelter, habitat, they produce flowers that offer food. They help sequester carbon, keep water on site. So crepe myrtle, I mean, crepe myrtle's everywhere, so I don't think we need to worry about planting more crepe myrtle, but crepe myrtle has been shown to support many different beneficial insects. Our beloved oak species, firebush, which is a native shrub, Chickasaw plum, many of our native hollies, buttonbush, incredibly important plant for particularly a lot of our predatory wasp species, and then Jatropha as well. My favorite types of plants are our native bunch grasses. We're all probably very familiar with muley grass, very common plant in both residential and commercial landscapes across Florida. But we have so many incredible native bunch grasses that I just want to make sure everyone's always aware of so we can try and diversify our bunch grass selection. So we do have muley grass, of course, but also Elliott's love grass, purple love grass, lopsided Indian grass, our Fakahatchee grass, which can get quite large, but we do have dwarf varieties as well, and then our Florida gamma grass. So all of these bunch grasses will flower. Their flowers might be a little smaller, more inconspicuous than our grandiose ornamentals or wildflowers, but they do provide pollen and nectar. More importantly, they provide habitat and shelter for insects to lay their eggs and raise their young in. So they almost create small microclimates that are very beneficial to our insects. Many of them have deep root systems, so they're also incredibly important for helping to prevent erosion and stabilize our soils. So when we're thinking about providing resources, more is key. We're really thinking about conservation biocontrol here. Many studies have shown that more flowers in a landscape, higher parasitism, and higher predation rates across the board. Here in Florida, we are very fortunate to be able to garden pretty much year round, apart from our recent scary cold snap or freeze that we had. So targeting at least 1 to 3 species in bloom throughout the year can be a pretty attainable goal. And diversity is key. Diversity is essential. So creating more urban biodiversity, more speciose landscapes is really critical. So providing resources, now we're going to talk about reducing disturbances. And that's really going to focus on our pesticide use and how intensely we are maintaining and managing our landscapes. Okay, so when it comes to pesticides, there are various situations where pesticides may be warranted, right? Especially here in the state of Florida. However, when we misuse pesticides, when we overuse them, when we're not reading the label, insects can become resistant to them, which is a situation that we don't want to be in. So how does this resistance happen? Essentially, what happens is we have an insect that has a mutation. Okay, so this is maybe a naturally occurring mutation in a singular individual that allows it to survive exposure to a pesticide. Okay, from there, that survivor will go on to reproduce and pass on its mutation. So it is essentially adding more resistant individuals to the overall population. And I bring this up because alternatively, on the other hand, pests don't usually become resistant to attacks by natural enemies or our good bugs, right? So, in other words, aphids haven't evolved a way to consistently avoid being eaten by lady beetles. Okay, so this is important to be thinking about. When it comes to pesticide use, pesticides can negatively impact natural enemies either directly or residually. When we think about direct impacts, we're thinking about contact pesticides. So essentially, we are spraying a pesticide, we're contaminating the surface of a flower or a leaf, leading to acute exposure during foraging. So these are insects that are coming into direct contact with these chemicals. We also have residual effects, which we see with our systemic pesticides. So these are absorbed by plants. They move throughout the plant into the leaves, stem, even down into the roots. And these chemistries can actually accumulate in pollen and nectar over time, right? So these are posing more long-term risks. When we talk about pesticide use, we really want to focus on the why, the what, and the when. So why are we using a pesticide? To determine this, we need to be scouting our landscapes regularly, right? We don't want to wait till something is totally out of control to start making management decisions. Before we make those management decisions, we need to identify what we're looking at. And that might seem super obvious, but you would be surprised, and especially when we saw the photographs earlier of some of our beneficials that can look quite similar to pests, we just want to make sure we know exactly what we're looking at. When we talk about the what, we want to be selecting the least toxic methods of pest control or pest management first. Okay. And when we talk about least toxic methods, I want to highlight that just because something is marketed or advertised as organic does not mean that it is non-toxic. Okay, so essentially, what an organic chemistry is insinuating is that it is derived from a natural source, such as a plant, a mineral, or some type of microbe. A really common example of this would be pyrethroids. So these are probably our most common insecticide sold at big box stores. You can grab them off the shelf. These are synthesized from pyrethrins, which are essentially taken from a flower, from chrysanthemums, right? So it might seem super straightforward, natural, organic, but pyrethroids are non-selective. So they are broad spectrum. They will attack the nervous system of any insect that they come into contact with. So this is kind of a broad spectrum, kill all type of insecticide. The most non-toxic form would be physical removal. Using a heavy water stream or physically removing a pest would be, of course, the most non-toxic. And then when we talk about less toxic, we can focus on things like microbial insecticides, such as BT-based products. We are still learning more about BT-based products and how selective or non-selective they can be on some different caterpillar species. We can also use things like insect growth regulators. So those will affect specific life stages and often target specific insect groups. And then things like horticultural oils and soaps, of course, with careful application. I will mention that when I say horticultural soaps, I do not mean Dawn dish soap. So I get this a lot in my various classes. And I'm sure if you have used Dawn dish soap to kind of combat a plant pest issue, it has killed that pest, certainly so. But we don't want to use detergents on our plants because what they also do is they break down that waxy cuticle layer and they can be quite phytotoxic over time. So they will actually damage your plant. Reducing disturbances also includes, again, how we're managing our landscapes through mowing, tilling, and debris. At the end of the day, stability is best for beneficial insects. So they do need stable habitats and shelter sites. So overwintering and nesting sites. Up to 80% of our native bees, for example, nest in the ground. So things like leaf litter, soil, hollowed out stems, just being less labor intensive with our management regimes. Many of our insects have very diverse life cycles. Okay, so their eggs, larvae, pupae, they are surviving and developing in these residential ecosystems. So we want to reduce trimming, raking, and just be thinking about these things more frequently. Last up, I'm going to leave you guys with some resources. So the first one I want to mention is, I talk a lot about incorporating native wildflowers, native woody perennials, native bunch grasses. Where do we find native plants? So I always like to plug the Florida Association of Native Nurseries. This is an incredible organization. They have a really great annual conference every year, should that interest you. But on their website, they have kind of a plant finder search engine, which is really nice. I use this a lot at work. If you are looking for any particular type of native plant, you will type it in, and what it will essentially bring up is all of the local growers in your area who carry that species, what size they carry that species in, how many they have, and then their contact information. We also have a really excellent UF IFAS gardening solutions site on beneficial insects. So this site will talk more in depth about a lot of the insects we discussed today. and then also give you some additional really great resources at the bottom of the page to continue diving into. Lastly, the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation has a ton of really great resources. They do a lot of incredible research. I love this document in particular, which is Native Plants for Pollinators and Beneficial Insects. So if you're interested in growing certain types of species, it will break those down based on, how much sun you get, what your soil conditions are, bloom periods, things like that. And that is all that I have for you guys today. Um, I will go ahead and turn my camera back on if you have any questions. If not, thank you again so much for coming today.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Let's start with a couple questions. We only have time for a few, but these seem, pretty relevant questions. Are all of the insects you addressed found throughout Florida?
Most of them are. Yeah, many of them will be active during various times of the year.
Mhm.
Sorry, can you guys see me? I'm trying to find my.
Yeah, we can see you, but you can stop sharing your screen if you want. There you go.
Right. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, most of them are found throughout Florida. Some of them might be a little bit more limited to areas of South Florida or during certain times of the year. They might be kind of going through hibernation or diapause. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have specific wildflower suggestions that are drought tolerant and heat tolerant for South Florida, or do you have some that could be used throughout?
Yeah, I would say we have some really great resources. We have so many native wildflowers in the state of Florida. Oftentimes, when I talk about them, I'll reference certain books that I use a lot or websites. The Florida Wildflower Foundation is really great for that. It will depend on your site conditions a little bit more specifically too. So what's going on with your soil, if you're getting full sun, partial shade. So I'm happy to send Jen or the state office some of those resources too, and um, something you can kind of flip through and work a little bit more intimately with.
Great. Is there a free app for identification of insects?
Oh, great question. So there are many apps to identify plants and insects. I hear about them a lot. I've used a few of them myself. If you have an iPhone, I know you can take pictures of plants and even insects now, and you can swipe up and it will try and identify it for you. I would always practice caution with that. Entomologists go through a very extensive series of steps to count tiny little hairs on the back of a head or tiny little hairs on one segment of a leg to try and ID insects to the species level. So I would always take those apps with a grain of salt and reach out to your local county extension office. We'd be happy to kind of work through those steps for you or with you.
Great. And you mentioned your local county extension. If you all go to floridafriendlylandscaping.com and scroll to the very bottom of the page, you will find a link to find your local IFAS agent. They will know the best. They will know the best the types of insects, the types of plants that will work in your area. They are your local experts on those type of issues. And I'm gonna ask you this one because I know it is near and dear to your heart. This person is wondering about cutting back goldenrod to the ground. They've heard that the stems may be used for nesting bees. And I know bees are one of your research
Yes.
areas.
Yeah, very true. So that's a great point. When the flowers start to go kind of like that gray color, I'll always collect the seed so I can spread elsewhere around the landscape. You'll want to wait to cut back through the fall. So generally, we kind of wait until our last kind of frost date. we'll cut those back and then they will flush back out very quickly because yes, a lot of our cavity dwelling native bees will be using those hollow stems to lay and rear their eggs in.
Okay, great. Let's see. Any thoughts about like mosquito dunks or tick management?
Yeah, when it comes to mosquitoes, because when we talk about supporting beneficials, we want to make sure we have a water source of some sort, but we want to be changing that water out. I've kind of talked to some of our entomologists at UF about the mosquito tabs in those water sources, how they may impact other insects, but most of them are pretty targeted for mosquito larvae. So unless it's super concentrated, it's not going to have a direct impact. Tick management. Yeah, I have a really hard time with ticks. I have very personal vendettas against ticks. I don't work with ticks very intimately. Um, so I know we have quite a few resources through UF to kind of address those issues more specifically.
Right. Well, thank you. It's 12 o'clock, so we're going to say goodbye for now. Heather, thank you so much for your presentation. Um, if you all want to see this presentation again, you can go to our homepage, floridafriendlylandscaping.com, and go up to resources, and you will see webinars. You can find every webinar we've done since 2020 listed there. You can also go to our YouTube page, Florida Friendly Landscaping YouTube page, and there are a lot of resources there as well. But Heather, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. And
Yeah.
everybody have a great day. Thank you.